At 3:41 local time, in the Norwegian Sea 280 nautical miles southwest of the Lofoten Islands, the USS Gerald R. Ford was conducting night flight operations in Sea State 3. The flight deck was active. An F divided by a -18F on final approach. Catapult crews cycling through pre-launch checks on a second aircraft. Reactor output steady. Every radar scope in the Combat Information Center showing clean returns across 200 miles of monitored airspace. Then the towed array spoke. The AN/SQR-19 streamed 2,600 feet behind the escorting destroyer USS Delbert D. Black detected the acoustic anomaly at 3 hours 41 minutes and 17 seconds, a low-frequency broadband transient consistent with the pressurization of large-diameter torpedo tubes. Not surface noise. Not biological. Mechanical, deliberate, close. 3 seconds later, the same array registered 3 separate high-speed cavitation signatures departing a single source bearing 156 degrees. Torpedoes. In the water. 3 of them. Already running. The Ford's Combat Information Center received the alert at 3 hours 41 minutes and 22 seconds. General quarters sounded 5 seconds after that. What followed in the next 19 minutes would constitute the most serious live engagement between a Russian submarine and an American carrier strike group since the end of the Cold War, and its conclusion would send a message that traveled from the Norwegian Sea to Moscow in under 2 hours. The USS Gerald R. Ford is the most capable aircraft carrier ever constructed. At 1,106 feet in length, with a full load displacement of 100,000 tons, she represents the first entirely new carrier hull design the United States Navy had fielded in 4 decades. Her AN/SPY 3 and AN/SPY 4 dual-band radar system provides simultaneous long-range air search and precision fire control across all threat axes. Her AN/SQQ-89AV 15 underwater warfare combat system integrates hull-mounted sonar, towed array data, helicopter acoustic inputs, and sonobuoy networks into a single tactical picture updated in real time. She was operating in the Norwegian Sea as the flagship of a multinational NATO exercise involving surface combatants from Norway, the United Kingdom, and the Netherlands. The exercise had been planned for months. Its timing and general location were not classified. The Russian Northern Fleet had been aware of it for weeks. The submarine that fired was not a relic. The Project 885M Yazan-class attack submarine, designated by NATO as the Kazan, represents the most capable Russian nuclear-powered attack boat currently in operational service. At 139 meters in length, with a submerged displacement of 13,800 tons, the Kazan is powered by an OK 650 kpm pressurized water reactor generating sufficient shaft power to sustain 35 knots submerged indefinitely without the battery limitations that constrain diesel-electric designs. Its MGK 600 or TISH-M4 sonar suite contains a spherical bow array and conformal flank arrays capable of passive detection at ranges exceeding 60 nautical miles in favorable acoustic conditions. The torpedoes it launched were UGSD Physic heavyweight weapons, 533mm wire-guided instruments carrying 320 kilogram warheads, capable of 50 knots over a 50-kilometer range. Unlike older Soviet wake-homing torpedoes, the UGSD uses a dual-mode guidance system combining wire command input with active and passive acoustic homing in the terminal phase. These are not Cold War relics. They are current-generation weapons designed specifically to engage carrier strike groups defended by modern countermeasures. The Kazan had achieved something that the Norwegian Sea's complex thermal layering had made possible only once before in recorded peacetime operations. It had penetrated the outer ASW screen of an active carrier strike group without triggering detection. For 47 minutes before the torpedo launch, it had moved through waters the strike group considered monitored, moving at near minimum speed beneath a sharp thermocline at 340 meters depth, its pump jet propulsor generating acoustic output below the threshold of the destroyer screen's passive detection systems. The shot it took was geometrically precise. 3 torpedoes spread across a 600-meter arc, converging on the Ford's projected position at 3-minute intervals designed to complicate any single defensive response. The Ford's tactical action officer had the engagement picture built within 40 seconds of the initial alert. 3 inbound tracks, bearing 156. Range from source contact, estimated 7,400 yards at launch. Speed consistent with UGSD profiles, approximately 50 knots in high-speed mode. Time to impact on current carrier heading, under 4 minutes. The source contact, the Kazan itself, was now visible on the destroyer's towed array as it maneuvered after launch. The submarine had accelerated to escape speed the moment its tubes fired, transitioning from near-silent minimum propulsion to active flight. That acoustic spike gave the Delbert D Black sonar team a firm classification within 11 seconds. Russian nuclear attack submarine. Yazan-class acoustic profile. Positive identification. The tactical picture now contained 4 simultaneous problems. 3 weapons inbound on converging tracks. One of the most capable attack submarines in the world, 7,400 yards inside the defensive perimeter, attempting to accelerate and dive beneath detection range before the response could reach it. The Ford's commanding officer reviewed the tactical display for 4 seconds. Then he gave 2 orders simultaneously. The first was helm, right full rudder, flank speed, coming to new course 040. The second was to the strike group, prosecute the submarine contact. The carrier began its turn. 100,000 tons of warship driven by 2 A-1B nuclear reactors producing 280,000 shaft horsepower, leaning into a course change that would complicate the firing geometry the Kazan's weapons officers had calculated before launch. Every degree of heading change degraded the torpedo's predictive track. Every knot of acceleration compressed the time available for the weapons to reacquire. The AN/SLQ-25C Nixie torpedo countermeasure system deployed from the Ford's stern in under 30 seconds, not one decoy, but a sequential deployment of 3 separate acoustic emitters at varying cable lengths, creating a distributed acoustic signature field behind the ship designed to present multiple apparent targets to incoming active seekers. At 3:43, the destroyer USS Lady Gulf's vertical launch system opened 2 hatches simultaneously. 2 RUM-139 ASROC anti-submarine rockets ignited and climbed into the Norwegian sea darkness, their motor flares briefly illuminating the low clouds ceiling before the weapons arced over and plunged toward the ocean's surface. Each carried a Mark 54 lightweight torpedo. Each was targeted at the Kazan's last confirmed position. The ASROC delivery system compresses the time between detection and weapon arrival from minutes to under 90 seconds. The rockets crossed 7,000 yards of open water in 44 seconds. The parachute systems deployed at altitude, slowing the Mark 54s to water entry speed. Both torpedoes entered the Norwegian Sea within 200 meters of the Kazan's projected position and immediately activated their search patterns. Simultaneously, 2 MH-60 or Seahawk helicopters launched from a Ford's flight deck, engines already turning, crews already strapped in, weapons already armed. Both aircraft carried and /AQS, 22 airborne low-frequency sonar systems, and additional Mark 54 torpedoes. They were airborne and transiting toward the engagement zone within 90 seconds of the general quarters alarm. Inside the Ford's Combat Information Center, the torpedo track picture was updating every 3 seconds from the towed array and hull-mounted sonar data. Track 1 was showing deviation. It had acquired the outer Nixie decoy and was turning toward the acoustic emitter rather than the carrier's hull. Track 2 was holding center mass. Steady bearing. No deviation. Active homing mode, not passive. It was not chasing noise. It was chasing the actual ship. Track 3 had gone temporarily silent, a characteristic of UGSD torpedoes executing a programmed search pattern after losing wire guidance. Silent did not mean gone. It meant unpredictable. Range to Track 2, 3,800 yards. Speed, 48 knots. Time to impact, approximately 2 minutes, 22 seconds. The Delbert D Black drove hard across the Ford's stern, placing the destroyer's hull between the approaching torpedo vector and the carrier. Screening doctrine. A destroyer interposes. Is not a sacrifice. It is a tactical choice to concentrate defensive systems against the highest priority threat vector while the carrier continues its evasive maneuver. From the Black's deck, a compact surface-launched anti-torpedo weapon fired. The Interceptor, a high-speed defensive round specifically designed to pursue and destroy incoming torpedoes, entered the water at 2,400 yards ahead of Track 2 and began its own terminal intercept run. Track 1 detonated against the outer Nixie decoy at 3 hours 45 minutes and 14 seconds. The explosion registered across every sonar display in the strike group, a sharp, violent signature 1,200 yards astern of the Ford. No hull contact. The acoustic emitter had done precisely what was designed to do. Track 3 reacquired at 3 hours 45 minutes and 31 seconds, bearing shifted, now tracking the second Nixie emitter rather than the carrier's main hull. The UGSD's active seeker had found the decoy signal and was running toward it. 41 seconds later, it detonated against the second emitter at 780 yards from the Ford's starboard quarter. The pressure wave reached the carrier's hull at a measurable intensity. Deck plating vibrated, overhead fixtures rattled in passageways, but the energy dissipated through open water before reaching any structural threshold. Track 2 was the dangerous one. It had ignored both Nixie decoys. Its active seeker had discriminated the electronic emitters from the actual hull's acoustic signature and maintained lock on the real target. At 3 hours, 45 minutes and 44 seconds, it was 1,100 yards from the Ford's bow and closing. The surface-launched interceptor from the Delbert D. Black closed the distance from astern of Track 2 at combined closing speed exceeding 90 knots. The underwater detonation occurred at 3 hours, 45 minutes and 51 seconds, 620 yards ahead of the Ford's bow, on the Torpedoes approach vector. The sonar display bloomed white across the frequency display. Both the interceptor and Track 2 disappeared from the acoustic picture simultaneously. The Combat Information Center fell completely quiet for 3 seconds. Then the sonar operator's voice came through, controlled and flat. Track 2. No longer tracking inbound. Interceptor detonation confirmed at bearing 158, range 620 yards. No hull contact. 3 torpedoes fired. 3 torpedoes defeated. The Ford was intact, but the Kazan was still there. The Mark 54 torpedoes delivered by the 2 ASROC rounds had bracketed the Kazan's last known position. The first weapon detonated in the submarine's baffles, close enough to the hull to cause significant internal damage from shock wave loading. Subsequent sonar data showed the Kazan's speed dropping from 28 knots to under 8 knots within 40 seconds of the first detonation. Depth fluctuating. Drive-train acoustic signature altered, the pump jet propulsor generating irregular output consistent with bearing damage or shaft misalignment. The 2 MH-60R Seahawks reached the engagement zone at 3:49 and deployed a coordinated sonobuoy pattern across a 4 nautical mile grid. The AN/AQS 22 dipping sonar on Seahawk 1 achieved firm contact on the Kazan at 3:51, depth 280 meters, speed 6 knots, bearing erratic. The submarine was still maneuvering, still capable, but clearly no longer operating at design parameters. The second Mark 54, released from Seahawk 2 at 3:53, detonated within 40 meters of the Kazan's hull. The sonar record captured the unmistakable acoustic signature of internal flooding, not catastrophic hull breach, but controlled flooding of 1 or more compartments. The submarine began ascending. At 4:07, the Kazan surfaced. The Yasen-class submarine broke the surface of the Norwegian Sea under the hovering rotors of both Seahawk helicopters, her sail visible against the low cloud ceiling, her hull streaming white water from emergency ascent. She was alive. Her crew was alive. But she was not going anywhere under her own power, at any speed that mattered. What happened next was what shocked Moscow. Within 11 minutes of the Kazan surfacing, 2 Norwegian P-3C Orion Maritime Patrol aircraft arrived on station from Andoya Air Station. A Royal Navy Type 45 destroyer operating 60 nautical miles northeast altered course at flank speed. A British nuclear-powered attack submarine that had been operating in the area under communications silence transmitted its position to 5th Fleet Command and began closing from the northeast. The entire NATO maritime surveillance network, satellites, maritime patrol aircraft, surface combatants, and attack submarines from 6 nations converged on a single GPS coordinate within 40 minutes. The Kazan sat surrounded in the Norwegian Sea. Not threatened, not attacked, simply observed, documented, photographed, and tracked by an alliance that had responded to a strike against one member as though it were a strike against all members, because under Article 5 it was. The Russian Ministry of Defense issued a statement within 3 hours describing the incident as an unauthorized weapons malfunction during a routine patrol. The statement was not credible and was not treated as credible by any NATO government. The acoustic record from 6 separate recording systems across 3 nations' naval platforms documented 3 deliberate torpedo launches with full fire control solutions against an identified American aircraft carrier. The accounting of this engagement operates on 2 levels simultaneously. On the tactical level, 3 UGSD Physic torpedoes, each representing years of Russian naval engineering investment and carrying 320-kilogram warheads capable of breaking a destroyer's spine, were defeated by a layered defensive architecture that performed exactly as designed. Nixie decoys absorbed 2 weapons. a surface-launched interceptor neutralized the third. The Ford absorbed 2 pressure wave impacts at safe distance and continued operations without structural compromise. The engagement cost the United States the expenditure of 2 ASROC rounds, 2 Mark 54 torpedoes, and standard helicopter flight hours. Total consumable cost, approximately $4.1 million. Damage to a carrier worth $13.3 billion, none. On the strategic level, the accounting is more consequential. The Kazan had achieved something tactically significant before it fired, a genuine penetration of an active carrier strike group's ASW screen under realistic operational conditions. That penetration was possible because the Norwegian Sea's complex thermal structure created acoustic shadow zones that even the Ford's layered sonar architecture could not fully eliminate. The Russian submarine's quiet approach at minimum speed beneath the thermocline demonstrated that Yazan-class boats represent a credible threat to American carrier operations in the high-latitude environment in ways that Iran's diesel-electric submarines simply cannot replicate. That honest assessment was acknowledged in the classified after-action analysis. It was not the triumphant narrative of an invulnerable carrier. It was the professional acknowledgement that a capable enemy had gotten close, and that the margin between a successful defense and catastrophic damage had been measured in seconds and yards, rather than comfortable distances. What the engagement also demonstrated was the systemic response that follows a strike on a NATO carrier. The Kazan's crew surfaced to find themselves surrounded not by a single nation's response, but by an alliance's. The convergence of Norwegian, British, and American assets on that position within 40 minutes was not improvised. It was the product of decades of integrated planning, shared sensor networks, and Article 5 commitments that transform an attack on one member's carrier into a collective response event involving the full weight of the world's most capable military alliance. Russian naval planners had modeled the American carrier's defensive systems. They had not fully modeled the NATO response architecture that those defensive systems by time to activate. The Ford resumed flight operations at 5:22. Combat air patrol aircraft were airborne within 18 minutes of the all-clear from the Combat Information Center. The carrier continued on its planned track without deviation. Somewhere in the Norwegian Sea, on the surface, surrounded by the maritime forces of 3 nations, the crew of the Kazan waited for decisions that would be made in Moscow. The carrier did not wait for anything. It continued forward because presence is not interrupted by attacks that fail to reach the hull, and deterrence is not maintained by pausing when someone tests whether it still exists. 3 torpedoes were fired. None struck. The strike group that fired back did so with an alliance at its back. That is the calculation that will be studied in every naval war college from Washington to Murmansk for years to come.